Hey, this is Mr. V, doing a book review today for David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. You should know that I try to do a spoiler-free book review, so if you see me looking down occasionally, I just have some notes, so I don't give any spoilers away, or very minor spoilers. So, let's get into the book, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. So, the main premise for David Copperfield is you're basically just, you're following the life of David Copperfield from the time he's little through adulthood. And, David Copperfield has a tough life, and the people around him have a tough life, so you just follow that aspect for David Copperfield. Now, before you consider reading this book, you should know that it was written in the 1850s. It was released in 1850. So, it does have some old style English. And so there were some difficult words at times. It wasn't difficult to understand, but, you should know that aspect. But let's start with the book review now for David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. So this book will be an interesting book to review because it was just an interesting book, and this is going to be tough to review. You'll see what I mean by the end of the review. But anyway, let's start with the official review. So, know that, this is a slower book, and I'm not saying it's bad. It's a slower book because it's basically just following the life of David Copperfield. And, it's kind of like life, that kind of stuff happens. Now, it's interesting seeing, like, okay, how will he act when he grows up? How will he act, as he continues to grow? And, like, what will he do? And, that kind of stuff is very fun. And, that's why overall I felt that this was a great story. Like the premise of it was a great story. It had some fun or interesting elements, great suspense at times. But there were times that it dragged and that there were times that it became very boring. So be aware of that. I'll get more in depth in just a bit. So I thought that this book had kind of an odd start. You're kind of just like thrown into the life of a kid and a woman. You don't fully know what's going on. You have a general idea, but you don't really know what's going on. And it's a little confusing, a little weird in the beginning. That's why I said it's kind of an odd start. But you quickly learn what's going on, and you see the tough things that are going on in their life, and you immediately start to do like, okay, what will they do? Like, and then you wonder like, okay, what would you do? And you start to feel some compassion for the characters. You do in their situations. And because of that, the story does draw you in. Despite it just being a very simple book, it's just you're following David Copperfield's life. It does draw you in because you do wonder like the direction of the book because you see the difficulties he's going through. So you wonder like, okay, what's going to happen? And you will see like, okay, how will he act? How will he get out of a situation? What will happen? And, you do see those types of things, and it is a lot of fun. And, overall, Charles Dickens, I thought that he wrote this book well. Like that the grammar, everything, that he developed the scenes well. And I think a big part is that he did great character development. I always think that helps the story a lot, is he did great character development in that he introduces the characters very well, but he also develops the characters well. And, that was very important. And that he did just a phenomenal job developing the characters because you learn about the character traits over many different chapters. It's not like he introduces the character, you have a general idea of who the character is within a few pages, and it's not like he just gives you all the traits immediately. You have a general idea, but he develops it over multiple chapters. And that's a big aspect, is that it's just like in life. You meet someone and you kind of know who they are, but it takes a long time to really get to know the good or the bad. And, I thought that his characters had great depth and that there were not only great depth about it, but there was also some of like these like minor traits about them that were really good and that he developed over multiple chapters. And, that was great because it was a lot of fun learning about the characters. And the one tough part is that there are a decent amount of characters. I wouldn't say it's overwhelming, but there's a decent amount, and you'll hear me talk more about that in just a little bit, but there's a decent amount of characters in here. So, just prepare for that. Now, some of the parts that I did not like of this book was that I thought some of the chapters and even the storyline, some of them did drag. And when they started to drag, it then became at points boring. Like that, I would even wonder at points like, okay, why is he even adding this? Even later in the book, I'd be like, why did he even add certain parts of the chapter? Because you'd be like, it didn't contribute anything to the story. It didn't contribute anything to the characters. And that's, Charles Dickens is known to sometimes overdo stuff. And I can see what they're talking about is that there were times where it did become boring because he would just drag it out too long. And other parts, another big aspect about this was that I felt the book was uneven. While I felt Charles Dickens wrote well, the story was uneven in that there were parts of excitement and suspense. There were some great parts, and then it would just drag. And as I said, some of the drag would then become boring. But also the suspense and all that was also uneven, in that you would get a great storyline and you would want to see what happens, and then he would drag it out over 60 or 80 pages to where at the end you're like, just finish the storyline. Or you would get a great suspense and he would finish it within 5 pages. And you would be like, you could have fleshed that out a bit more. You felt almost like, why did you end it so quickly? So that was very uneven. It would either be too long or too short. And, that was a little weird. And other parts were I was confused with a little bit. Because I already said, I didn't know why he was including certain things. I'm not sure. Maybe it was to build characters or the scenes. Maybe I missed something. Did I misinterpret something? I don't know. But there were parts that were a little confusing. And some of the parts, I even got lost a little bit. Not fully. Most of the book I was fine, but some parts I got lost. And, I used SparkNotes just to make sure I understood the book well, or the chapters well. And there were some parts where I was lost, and then I would read the SparkNotes, or I was slightly lost. And I'd read the SparkNotes and I'd be like, oh, that's what they meant. It didn't come across that way at all. And, there was things like that would happen. And it could be because certain storylines he would drag out for so long, and then you'd get the response in 1 page. Maybe that's why sometimes I was like, oh, that's what they meant by that one thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it was meant to be that way. I really don't know, but I do know there was just a few points where I was a little lost. Again, most of the book I was fine, but there was things like that. And as I mentioned about the characters, there was many characters, and there's no problem with there being many characters. The tough part is that you would sometimes forget the characters, and they would they'd introduce a character, you'd get to know the character a bit, and then the character would disappear for 150 pages. Then when he introduces the character again, they'd be like, oh, who's in this apartment? Oh, it's this character. And you'd forget who the character is, to where it would kind of you didn't get the full suspense, because you'd be like, who is this person again? And then when you looked it up, you'd be like, oh, that's who the person is. And then it would do it. But there was times, he did that a few times, where it was just the character, and then the character just disappears for about 150, 200 pages, and then he comes back, type of thing. So, that was one part that was a little tough. But, overall, I did enjoy the final chapters. The final chapters were good because, of course, I judge an end, if you like it, but also, does it wrap everything up? And I thought that the final chapters wrapped everything up well, and I thought that they did a great job there. So, that, I really enjoyed the last few chapters. It makes you feel really good at that. And there's no questions at the end of the book. So, that's always a great thing. But overall, as I said, this is an interesting book because it draws you in enough, but it's not super intense. But it does draw you in enough. But it's not one of those books that you're like, okay, you just want to keep reading chapter after chapter after chapter. You'll finish a chapter, 2 chapters, and then you'll be like, okay, I can put it down for a bit. But you still wanted to continue in the future, but you just didn't have that drive to oh my God, what happens next? And I think it could be partly because he would drag out some of the storylines that you're like, just finish the storyline already. And one part that I say will knock it down is that it did not have a lasting impression on me. I can tell this will not have a lasting impression on me and I think it is because some parts were really good, but then some parts were just boring. And that's why I'll remember some of this book, but overall it just won't have that lasting impression. And I could see that he could have cut this down by he could have probably cut a third of the book. And he would have been able to get all the storylines, and everything would have still been great. Then I think it would have made a better book. But yeah, I can definitely tell this won't have that. But Charles Dickens is known for that, to write a long book and like kind of overwrite, and that's what he's known for. But anyway, let me give you my official review. So I always rate my books on a scale of 0 to 10. A 0 is an awful book. A 5 is an average, and a 10 is phenomenal. So if it gets a 10 or anywhere near a 10, you should definitely put that on your reading list. Because again, a 5 is average, and I'm a tough critic. It's hard to move up even 1 point in my rating system. So, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. This was a tough one to rate. And I know I'm not going to get any fans by doing this. I may draw some criticism by doing this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to rate David Copperfield a 3.5 out of 10. Now remember, a 5's average, and I'm a tough critic, but I'm going to rate it with a 5 being average. I'm going to rate this a 3.5. It almost got a 4, but I'm rating this a 3.5. The reason I'm doing it is because while it was a nice story, I felt it was too long, and I felt that there were some fun elements, but it didn't capture me fully, and that there were some parts that were just boring, and that again, I don't think it will leave that lasting impression on me. And I think again, it's because he just drew it out too long. It did not get a horrible rating, like never read it, but I would say you don't have to rush out to get this book, but it'd be up to you. Anyway, if you guys have any comments, disagreements, questions, please post it in the comment section below. I hope you guys click the subscribe button, because I always upload multiple book reviews from different categories. But anyway, thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy reading.